Can the Jazz move up in the draft? The draft and trade rumors are swirling. Let's discuss the merit to some involving the Jazz next on Locked On Jazz.
You are Locked On Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Jazz. My name's Leif Thulin. I'm excited to be back with you guys. As always, love talking to you guys, filling in for David Locke on Locked On Jazz. You guys know by now, but I'm a lifelong Jazz fan who's a credentialed NBA draft analyst for Locked On NBA Big Board, attendee of both the 2023 and 2024 NBA Combine, Jazz broadcast assistant and statistician for the past 3 seasons, lover of college hoops. So I can keep you covered on the college side, as well as know a lot about what the Jazz have done in the past few years and what might need to change. And I'm looking forward to bringing a unique perspective and get you guys as ready as you can be for the NBA draft, which it's hard to know anything in this one. Even the experts, quote unquote, it's hard to know anything. But I'm trying to give you all the insight and analysis you need to tell your friends who the Jazz will be taking and share your own opinions on who the Jazz should take. And are these trade rumors worth taking? So that's the topic today. Thanks for making Locked On Jazz your first listen every day. And remember, Locked On Jazz is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube at Locked On Jazz, where the best way to help us grow is to comment anything below. And today's question is, which of these trades is your favorite? Simple one. I think I have one that is my favorite, and I'm curious to see which one you guys go for. Also wanted to thank PrizePicks, as this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code, all lowercase, LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Alrighty, on today's episode, I'll break down the feasibility of a rumor of the Jazz moving up to 3, but trading Walker Kessler at number 10, and would I do it? In the second segment, the New Orleans Pelicans have a decision to be made. Do they deal Brandon Ingram, maybe Trey Murphy, and what package do the Jazz have to offer to get either? And in the final segment, I'll discuss a few rumors I saw on Twitter. I don't know about how verified they are, but you know, when there's smoke, there's a fire, and I've seen these a couple times, including one swap between the Jazz and Thunder, which would have the Jazz landing Josh Giddey for a season, along with a few pick swaps. All right, let's dive right in. Well, the draft is fast approaching, and as I imagine, many of you guys have found the players that you want to draft at number 10. But let's talk about the players that may not be there at number 10 that the Jazz truly could covet. And the method to get those players, which seems feasible to me, would be trading up. The rumor I saw was that the Jazz have interest in trading up, and the Houston Rockets would be the partners. The Rockets hold the 3rd pick, and the Jazz would be asking for the Jazz would be asking for the 3rd pick. The Rockets would be asking in return for the 10th pick and Walker Kessler. Would you do it? Let's go through this. My first reaction to seeing this deal was yes, be aggressive and then trade up to get our guy. The way I'm reading the tea leaves has the Jazz, in this case, trailing behind the Hawks and the Wizards. And I think the Hawks and the Wizards, in some order, would be taking a pair of Frenchmen, Zachary Rissache and Alexander Sarr, maybe the flip-flop of the order. Despite rumors saying the Hawks want to trade down and are interested in Klingon, I just don't know if they trade off the number 1 pick unless they get a massive package. And I know the Spurs are linked to wanting number 1, but that's just the way I see it. So if I'm correct and the 2 of the Frenchmen in Sarr and Rissache are off the table, I believe the Jazz would look at a pair of UConn stars in Stephon Castle, Donovan Klingon, and maybe the likes of Tijon Salaun, or one of my personal favorites, Rob Dillingham. The first thing to address for me in this, in unpacking this, is would the Jazz really like to have a player they don't think drops that far? Because trading into the lottery this year has never come at a lower price. That's good and bad. It means that it won't happen in most drafts because teams – I'll rephrase this. It means that it won't happen because teams don't want to lose the established NBA players they have, as this class doesn't warrant a ton of enthusiasm, and it may not have what turns out to be established NBA players you'd be giving up in order to move up in the draft. So for reference, if the Jazz were to trade Walker Kessler, he's an established NBA player. You don't know how good he is, but most drafts, there's kind of a limit of how good a player is. Like, how good of a player do you need to trade in order to get into X spot? And this year, I don't think many teams want to give up the players to get draft picks, just because there's not much enthusiasm about this. So in the Jazz's case, it would be Walker Kessler. Kessler, despite a poor year in last year comparison to his rookie season, is an NBA. I would be pretty unhappy personally if the Jazz were to make a deal and go after Donovan Clingan, because Donovan Clingan, one of his most closely compared players, would be Walker Kessler. They have a lot of similarities. The Jazz would be losing the 10th pick, Walker Kessler for Donovan Clingan, who I think could be better than Kessler, but by how much, and is it worth losing both those plays? So that's not the direction I would go, even though the Jazz in some things have been tied to wanting Clingan. The Grizzlies are tied to wanting Clingan. The Spurs don't want to because they have Wemby, but they want to trade up, and the Hawks may trade down in hopes that Clingan's there at 4. Now, if the Jazz took Stephon Castle, whom I believe the Jazz like, I would be happy, as he has versatility in the way he can impact the game. He scored without having the ball in his hands as a point guard, defended at a high level at the point of attack, was a point guard in high school, is 6'6", and his shot, in my opinion, is better than percentage would indicate, more so than a few other shaky shooters that came out looking not so great in Locke's shooting methods, which have typically been reliable. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, every day is due. David Locke's put together some shooting splits that typically tell you if you're going to be a successful shooter in the NBA. Castle was in a scary, precarious perch on those statistics based off his shooting numbers. Castle, to me, the appeal is versatility. He can play with the ball in his hands and be a point guard. He can play without the ball in his hands, be a 2 guard, and impact the game. And yes, shooting would be a swing skill, but I think he's the type of guy who can develop and become a very good player. Like, I've seen everything from Josh Hart, Jimmy Butler, and Jalen Suggs. Like, you see a bunch of these type of players, but the 3 I mentioned are all very different, but they all have this hard-nosed way of going about the game, and they impact the game on both sides of the floor. I think he can be better than the first two, the 2 other than Jimmy Butler, and maybe, who knows, maybe he is the star of this class. I would love to give a chance for the Jazz to make this trade if Stephon Castle's the target. I've really warmed up to him. The next evaluation in assessing if this is a good trade or not would be, how different of a player can you get at 3 than you can at 10? In most years, it's a pretty different player. Is Castle or Clingan that much better than Dillingham, by the way, whom I believe is excellent, but less of maybe what the Jazz immediately covet, is Danny Ainge and Zanuck say they want size. Would Cody Williams or Ron Holland, who fit that ilk to a T of having interesting qualities that maybe are rare to be there at 10, especially in a class that, is devoid of top-end talent, maybe they have some of that. Maybe Tijon Salam were to fall to 10. So is the 3rd pick that much more valuable than 10th? It is, but I don't think it's an enormous gap. But the gap isn't as large as it has been, and you're giving up a player who's averaging 2.4 blocks already in the NBA and the 10th pick in order to get an unproven commodity. A little bit of hesitance. Though I believe Kessler, back to Kessler on one thing, I believe Kessler has room to grow. I don't think rookie year Kessler will be too much different than prime Walker Kessler in terms of the true impact he has on a basketball game. I do think he's a valuable piece to a roster, especially as his free throws improve and he, more importantly, regains his confidence. I just don't think that his skill set is going to improve so much. He's always going to be the dunker spot big who finishes lobs and blocks shots, and I don't know how much of a ceiling there is to approach. Example about how trading up is very different this year than other years. Last year's draft was impossible to infiltrate and trade up because the asking price for 9, which ended up being Taylor Hendricks for the Jazz, to move up to 2 or 3 would ended up being Brandon Miller and Scoot Henderson, and that's the same difference in spots this year. And that's not a slight to Taylor Hendricks, but no one in the right mind would have thought, oh my gosh, we're going to give up this pick to get 9 and maybe a adequate player. And that's not a slight to Hendricks, but Miller is a potential all-star. Maybe not a superstar, but he scores the rock at a really high level as a rookie. Castle has more clear flaws as a player than Miller, so this is a leap of faith, but it also makes the trade possible to begin with. So what do you guys think about that? Is there a player at 3 that you guys would make the deal for, or do you guys want proven players who may be on their way out of their current nest? Little pun there, so you'll see where this is coming from. Well, coming up next, I'll tell you about 2 birds who appear to be fighting over one nest in New Orleans, and how the Jazz could lure one of Trey Murphy or Brandon Ingram to Utah. But first, let me tell you something about LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for your role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team and learn faster for free. You can do it faster and it's free. Why not? LinkedIn isn't just a job board that I peruse frequently. LinkedIn also helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnba. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnba to post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. Also, let me tell you guys about Murdoch Chevy. Murdochs have been in Utah for over 80 years. Chevy is American as American gets. When you think of patriotism and you want to see a truck embody it, that's Chevy. They're located in Woods Cross and Logan. You have a great lineup of Chevy trucks, the Colorado and the Silverado, and also you can check the website to see the latest deals and what's in stock, what's on the floor to see which trucks are there, what the newest prices, the newest deals. All of it's updated, and they do an excellent job at both stores, Woodcross and Logan, updating these things so you can have your interest, and then you want to see that specific truck, it's going to be there. The amazing lineup also features SUVs with the Tahoe, the Suburban, the Blazers, Equinox, and the Trax. All of it's part of Murdoch Chevy, and they're sensational. They offer a good deal and an amazing product. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, filling in for David Locke, and I got one last question for you guys. Are you guys watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day, and you have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Well, make the switch to Locked On Sports today. I don't know what you guys are waiting for. A free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, every day. All right, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and I adore Trey Murphy. Like, I'm just going to be transparent. I adore Trey Murphy. I think the Pelicans do too, though. And he was one of my biggest draft hits. I saw him hit 6 threes in his first game at Virginia against Towson, and I never unsaw it. I moved him to the top 15 then and there and never changed it. Draft hit aside, I think he's one of the very best players in the NBA to not have their ball in their hands all that frequently. And he's one of those 3-and-Ds at the premier level. So if you exclude guys like PG, Kawhi, you know the type I'm talking about. Maybe even Mikal Bridges if he's reached that summit. But if you exclude those guys, and you could take a Bridges 3-and-D to be a near all-star type hump in the NBA, and like if you were to look at this on a curve, and you were to say, well, this guy is really good on one side of the basketball floor, and this guy's not so good. You think maybe Jaden McDaniels, excellent on defense, dare shooter on offense, but he has a skill set. He was an All-American and was a scorer coming out. Trey Murphy's not that heralded coming out, but the reason I bring that up is Bridges is just about at the cusp of being an all-star. Well, if you're going to take one player in the NBA to make a Mikal Bridges-esque jump, if he has a change of scenery, or maybe the scenery around him changes should he stay in New Orleans, I think it's Trey Murphy. I think he's far better with the ball in his hands. He's a great shooter. He makes his team better, defends. He also is such a good athlete that he was in the dunk contest, and if it weren't for Mac McClung, so you take the NBA players in this, Trey Murphy would have won the dunk contest. And he's a 40% three-point shooter who scores nearly 15 a game, is an unselfish player and a good defender at 6'9" and 23 years old. So the reason I bring that up is I think, like I said, the nest is too small in New Orleans. I think Trey Murphy and Brandon Ingram can't both be paid, or at least won't both be paid by the Pelicans. So I think the Jazz should swoop in. I'm genuinely curious if the Pelicans prefer Trey because he fits better with Zion and they've decided Zion's the guy. I think I would. And then you try to shop Ingram as best you can, but that kind of lowers the asking price for Ingram, which makes it possible that they're like, well, if we can't get like something that is worth the all-star player that Brandon Ingram is, then maybe you should trade Trey Murphy, see if his value is more and they can build more instantly. Because I don't think the Pelicans have the guards of the future. I don't think CJ McCollum's a point guard, and that hinders them in some ways. All right, Pelicans aside, let's get back to the Jazz. I also though I love Trey Murphy, I don't think we should dismiss or disrespect Brandon Ingram, even though he appears to be kind of treated as an almost reclamation project because he's struggling against OKC and Dort. Brandon Ingram's an all-star. He's been an all-star. Brandon Ingram can score and pass. Lou Dort's a monster, and Ingram maybe isn't meant to be a top-tier number one. And I don't know. I think I'm one of the skeptics that probably doesn't think Lowry's a number one either. So then what good does pairing two non-number ones do together, and how good can it make us? I hear all that, and I talked about that in a previous episode. Ingram's highly effective without Zion, though. If you look at number ones over the past few years without Zion Williamson, he averages 24 a game, and he's been pretty good in games without him efficiency-wise. This year, 21, 5, 6, good passer, creates 49% from the field, 36 from 3, 80 from the line. It's a really good player. So you may be asking, why does this matter? How could the Jazz cut either of them? Well, Twitter and Jazz beat writer Tony Jones, who may be on with me here later this week, I'm really hoping so, brought it to my attention. I saw it on Twitter that Ingram, there's a trade rumor, and Tony made the point about being potentially more willing to deal for Trey for the asking price than Ingram. And I thought about it. I thought it was an interesting topic. So the rumor had the Jazz giving up the 2027 first from the Lakers, a 2025 first from the Timberwolves, along with John Collins and Colin Sexton with 29 and 32. That's steep. But in return, the Jazz get an all-star player in Brandon Ingram, a youngster in Dyson Daniels, who was an 8th pick a few years ago, and this year's pick 21. So instead of 29 and 32, the Jazz would have 10 and 21, Brandon Ingram, Dyson Daniels, and then they lose, of course, the coveted Lakers pick and a Timberwolves pick, which likely won't be all that valuable. So that's steep, and I probably wouldn't do it, as I said in a previous episode talking about Ingram, because I don't think the fit's great with he and Lowry, and I don't think there's evidence that he's a successful number one, but it makes you think. It really does. And I don't know how he and Lowry would perfectly coexist. If the 2027 pick were excluded, I would be inclined, even if the Jazz gave up another pick this year in lieu. Maybe if they give the 10th pick and kept the 2027 one, where it could be a really good draft, the Lakers are kind of in a dangerous spot where, you know, they're losing their best player and their face of their franchise right now in LeBron. Anthony Davis, who knows if he stays? What are the Lakers going to be then? That's why that pick is so valuable. Now, this is where this gets interesting, though. Tony Jones said he would be more willing to part with that aforementioned price, the one that's not tampered by me saying swap the 2027. This includes the 2027, but he'd be more inclined to get Trey Murphy, whom I already professed my love for. And so I kind of thought about that, and I think I agree. What I wonder, though, is could the Jazz asking price be lower for Trey Murphy than it is for Brandon Ingram? Or is it the same or higher because it seems like they want to splice the floor for Zion, and then they'd want to keep Murphy as opposed to Ingram, who's more ball in hand, less able to play off of Zion's strengths. I don't know if you can make an asking price higher for a guy like Trey Murphy over a guy like Brandon Ingram, who's not very old in his own right, about 25, 26 years old. And he's very good. Like he's really, really good at basketball. And he's an established all-star. I just read off his stats for you guys. I don't know if the price can be that high. So if Trey Murphy's price, it has the amended version where it's even this year's 10, or you take away that pick, maybe you put in a Jazz pick in the future as opposed to the Timberwolves, some variation that has the same players. Maybe the Jazz don't receive the same, the pick back, the pick swap that helps the Jazz this year, 29, 30, 32 for 21. Maybe that's excluded. I really would consider that. So I would offer that package minus the 2027 first for Trey. And if they ask for a different pick, I truly would consider. I think Trey Murphy, just to finish out this thought, is my number one target for the Jazz this offseason as a player to go after. And I know Danny Ainge said big game hunting, and it's not the sexiest name. He's not even the guy with the name Trey that it has the most cachet. Trey Young, obviously, is someone who's tossed out there. But I think Trey Murphy, that is the best upside 3-and-D in the league right now, with a chance of becoming more. And I would gladly try to get that. Many of you guys will be bothered by not getting a guy who's an established scorer and getting rid of a guy who scored north of 20 points per game in Colin Sexton, along with these picks for a guy that averaged 15, 5, and 2 at 23 years old. And I would tell you, I think if Ingram is gone next year, that means they pick Trey Murphy. and he will score 20 a game, be a 40% three-point shooter, be a plus defender, not quite the Herb Jones level defender, but I think he's a more impactful basketball player than Herb Jones is, and everyone knows how impactful Herb Jones is on both sides of the floor. Obviously, his defense is otherworldly. Trey Murphy's not that far behind Herb on defense, and he's way ahead on offense. You get all that. He has the athleticism I mentioned. He's young. He's growing into his game. So for the Lakers pick to be included, which I think is rich, but if they demand that, maybe take out a 2025, and I still would consider. That's how much I think Trey Murphy is going to break out and be one of those guys, and he's target number one for me for the Utah Jazz. And I'll talk to Tony. I got another guest I'm trying to work on getting. I'm going to ask trade targets to them, and maybe he's one that pops up for them. I know Patrick Williams, a kind of lower level 3-and-D wing that pops up for some. Well, I don't know. This is the way I go to it, but it also depends. Do the Jazz continue with a slow build, or do they kind of accelerate the pace? Because this was accelerate the pace without getting a star, and maybe you could still get a younger player and a proven draft pick. Maybe you can make some of these other trades and move up and get a guy you believe, and that helps accelerate the build. Or do you try to be not so good next year and maybe put the chips in when the 2025 draft comes? Let me know what you guys think. Am I crazy? But I also, I don't know if you guys are going to like this part. I also have I'm not allowed to gamble in the NBA, but I will say this. If a guy jumps from about 14.8 points per game to 22, I wonder what his most improved player of the year odds are, and maybe get some award nominations, because I think he's that good. So if Brandon Ingram leaves, check out those odds, and that's something I would consider. Well, coming up next, we'll discuss a potential swap between the Jazz and Thunder, landing the Jazz Josh Giddey along with other picks. But first, a word from PrizePicks. PrizePicks is number one fantasy sports app in America with more than 5 million members. It's the most fun and exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less than two or more player stats on a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. So it's as simple as taking, I think this player is going to have more points than the total, and then the next player is going to have less points than the total, and you win some money right then and there. With PrizePicks, you can turn $10 up to $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You can make a PrizePicks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You don't need to pick more or less. All you need to do, is you just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you're locked in. And I like to do it on tennis. That's the one I like to do during Grand Slams. I like to pick on maybe they'll get more aces than projected in Grand Slams because the matches go for longer durations. But if you guys want more hoops, the finals are still kicking, but the Mavericks are barely alive. They're barely breathing. But when the finals are over, their hoops action doesn't stop on PrizePicks. It's that great. Women's basketball is just getting started. And with young stars like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese looking to make names for themselves alongside greats like Brianna Stewart and Asia Wilson, you can win up to 100 times your cash watching them ball out. So download the app today and use code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. All righty, welcome back to Locked On Jazz. I'm Leif Thulin, and the final rumor to diagnose is as follows. The Jazz would be giving up number 10 and 29 in this year's draft, John Collins, and in return, they would receive Josh Giddey on the final year of his rookie deal, pick number 12 of this year's draft, and then, here's the big one, the protected pick back that they got from OKC. The Jazz sent to OKC in order to get Derek Favors a few years ago. And now that's one that's being bemoaned among the Jazz community for a while, that the Jazz had to send a pick to get someone who was going to go to the Jazz, and you lost valuable picks, and now it's hampering our future. So we get it back. But let's digest this. The Collins for Giddey swap is probably slightly favorable for the Jazz in one sense, because I don't think Giddey factors into their future all that much. So it doesn't hurt the Thunder. The Jazz would be getting a player that I deem to be slightly better and far younger, but I do doubt he would figure too heavily into the Jazz's future should the Jazz get much better like the Thunder did, because he doesn't seem to be part of their future. And is he the Jazz's point guard? He's big, he's long. Maybe that could work, but then the Jazz would have to re-sign him and structure a new deal. And who knows how that'll work after signing Lowry or whomever they may sign this year, because that wouldn't be option one. So next summer, he would have to be a free agent. They'd have to extend. So you'd only get 1 year of services. Now, Collins could help the Thunder, but let's stick with the Jazz. Now let's get to the picks. Because Giddey is more coveted than Collins, the picks probably favor the Thunder, except for the clever part where the Jazz would get back their own pick. And you say, wait, don't the Jazz keep the pick next year if we land in the top 8? Yes, but only if we land in the top 8. My understanding would be that the Jazz would no longer need to convey. So the Jazz would pick where they pick, whether it's 10 or it's 7. And in this case, 7 would be protected, and then they would no longer need to convey. And then if the Jazz were to land at 10, unfortunately, in the odds like they were this year, but we had a top 10 this year and it gets to 8 next year, the Jazz would still no longer need to convey and they would get their own pick. Doesn't help that much, but in terms of if the Jazz are immediately drafting it at such and such spot, but eventually it has to convey to the Thunder as it stands. So that would be the best bonus of this trade. Now, do I think the Thunder would go for it? I don't know. So, but that little piece of that nugget right there in and of itself would make me think about this deal. So if the Jazz go with a slow burn development, as I personally prefer, but Ryan Smith seems to want to win sooner, maybe that helps the Jazz, because then they can not be worried about conveying and not having to hit a home run in a certain time frame. But that would be the best part of the trade if the Jazz go in that case. Whereas if they get better immediately and then they convey next year, doesn't hurt as much, but you'd always want your own picks. So if that's the Jazz's plan in order to get better, it doesn't matter as much. But if the Jazz's plan to go through this slower trajectory and eventually to reach a higher ceiling, kind of a 1 step backwards, 2 step forward approach, I would definitely take this trade. You got to choose a clear direction, though. The Jazz, I think, they started 10-3 2 years ago when Wembanyama was the crowned jewel, and they put themselves out of a real chance of getting him. They got the 9th pick. Hendricks is a fine player, but he's not Victor Wembanyama. This year, the Jazz went 26-26 through 52 games. Well, what did the Jazz end? Worst record after that in the league at the trade deadline. Like, it's the Jazz have to pick a direction and not muddle and toil in mediocrity. That's where I would start with that. So, digest that. Let me know what you guys think. But let's address a few more rumors in the final minutes here. There's a rumor that the Jazz are trying to make people think they want Donovan Clingan and feign interest in Clingan and want to get Castle or Shepherd. I don't know. I don't think the Jazz want Clingan, but they're tight-lipped. I don't have any sources on this one, but I could be wrong. I just don't think they want him. But I do think, and I would be appalled, and I mean truly appalled, if the Jazz took Reed Shepherd. I know there's going to be a hive of Jazz fans that come after me for this, but I think he's the antithesis of what Danny Ainge covets. And what I mean by that is Danny Ainge has talked about having long, multi-positional dudes who know how to put the ball in the hoop in a plethora of ways, not just spotting up. He just wants people who can do things on both ends of the floor and not be pigeonholed into one spot. And not only pigeonholed defending one spot, but I'm saying if Reed Shepherd is a defender, I think he's going to be destroyed. And if he's an offensive player, there's a lot of faith being put on teams thinking he's going to be a point guard that are drafting the top 10. And I loved watching Reed Shepherd at Kentucky. I just want to preface that. I love college basketball. I adore it. But he's the guy that I think people misunderstand the most. Reed Shepherd never played point guard at Kentucky. Now he's going to be a top 7 pick at 6'1" because he shot 51% as a catch and shoot guy, or 51% in total, but largely as a catch and shoot guy created by the other point guard on the team, Rob Dillingham. I don't know why Shepherd stock's higher. That's just my thing. Now, on the other hand, Castle, I believe, is the dude that the Jazz would be taking if they move up, whether it's to 3 or to 5 or anywhere around that range. I think the Jazz would be moving up in order to get Stephon Castle. I think that's the Jazz's favorite player. Now, one landing spot I have heard for the Jazz jumping to is number 5 and trading with the Detroit Pistons, who own that pick. I like the aggression. I think it's possible in a bad draft because, like I mentioned earlier, it's hard to move up when their players are all coveted and it's the top of the top, the cream of the crop. But in a bad draft, there's a lot of unknown, and it makes teams think about, why not? Like, maybe we should just take a player that we know what they're all about and, pick a few spots lower. It's kind of the football approach once you get to the later stages. There's a lot of trades like that, trading backwards. I don't know if they do it, but the reason I think the Pistons would have reluctance to do so is because they're redundant at a lot of positions already. And I don't know why the Pistons would be taking an established NBA player plus a pick that's only 5 spots lower. It truly helps them. Not that it doesn't make sense in terms of financials or here's the player they should take. I just don't see a reason that they shouldn't take a shot to find someone good on a rookie deal rather than take a trade. But I'd be all for it if the Jazz do it. Then the last thing I've been pondering, I'll leave you guys off with, is could the Jazz even go after Andrew Nembhard? Nembhard signed a kind of about $9 million contract with the Pacers ahead of the last few years, and it's including a $6 a little over $6 million guaranteed. And I think they were spot on. They signed him early. They knew what they were getting. He's really, really good. He showed it when Halliburton is there. He's a capable player running the team, complementing Tyrese Halliburton at a time when Mathurin was out, and scoring, stepping up as a scorer, running the second unit. All that stuff's great. And then he thrived when Tyrese Halliburton went down against the Knicks in the playoffs. It was almost similar to Jalen Brunson against us. Like Luka was out. Well, who's going to step up? Oh, Jalen Brunson scored 41. Like, it didn't feel good. I was working that game. I was not happy whatsoever. But I don't think he's quite that level of a jump. But you never know in those type of players. And the fact that he thrived, and when the whole team runs around Halliburton, and Halliburton's no longer at the reins, and they still were able to score effectively, and he played so well, it's going to raise his price tag, absolutely. But the Jazz, Danny Ainge said he wasn't confident he has his point guard. Maybe Nembhard's the point guard of the future on a team that already has a point guard of a similar age that's better than him. So he could be available for the right asking price. I don't think it's the flashiest move, but I think it could be an effective one. So thank you guys for listening. Let me know what you think of all these different trades. Am I up in the night about thinking Trey Murphy's that great? Do you think Nembhard's a great target? What do you think of the prospects I briefly broke down, Castle and Shepard? And I know some of you guys are tuning in for the draft and not rumors. That's where I got a couple guys coming in, a couple big hitters that know their stuff about the draft. And I'll be talking with those guys and informing you. So keep listening, and we're going to dial down who the Jazz should draft. And I think I'm narrowing in on a few players that I prefer, even though nothing's a certainty in this draft. So thank you guys for listening. And my last question would be, have you guys looked at this yet? Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And it's also now available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. So thank you guys for listening. With your next listen, check out Locked On NBA, breaking down the NBA Finals. Can Luka and the Mavs come back, pull off the improbable, or is it over? We find out. Maybe it'll be a recap by the time you're listening to this one. So I appreciate you guys. Look forward to talking with you guys the rest of the week. And as always, go Jazz.